Today is November 24th, 2024. This is episode 68 of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I'm joined by Joe Meade. Tonight, Joe and I will go over Week 13 in the Big Ten in football. A ton of important action in the conference, and Joe, a ton of important action in other conferences that are no doubt going to affect the teams in the Big Ten. We'll talk about that at the end, but we have got the Friday night football game that started off our week, Purdue going on the road to Michigan State. And Joe, Michigan State does get the victory, 24-17, but they do not score in the second half. They make really tough work of it, and they only end up with a touchdown win. Michigan State gets the victory, and they take their bowl eligibility chances one more week, but man, this was a lot closer than it should have been.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was a well-played game. It was an entertaining game. I think that's the perfect way to categorize this, Sean. I think the first half Purdue was a sneak peek of why they're probably going to be 1-11 this year. No effectiveness moving the ball, not protecting the ball, whether it was the Maccabee fumble, whether it was the reckless throws the receivers either led Hudson Card to throw or whether it was his own volition. In the first half, you kind of just thought MSU was going to cruise, even with the injury to Jack Velling, all the guys still out in the secondary. They were capitalizing off all their chances, scoring off turnovers. Giles looked comfortable, making good throws. Whether it was to Montory Foster, who I thought was the game's MVP on offense. And they had some effective runs with KLA, K-Ron Lynch-Adams, and Nate Carter. That was the first half. The second half, I think anyone who watched that game could understand how close Michigan State was to losing, not just on one occasion, but on multiple occasions. Purdue set blitzes. They set multiple man rushes, which really messed up Giles. He did not look comfortable at all in the second half. You could see him being very frustrated on the sideline, not necessarily throwing or angry, just kind of mystified at what was happening, especially because they moved it with such ease in the first half. And the story of the game, Sean, is going to be that 2nd and 7, that Hudson Card bomb that was dropped. That would have been a 70-yard TD shot to tie the game at 24. Unfortunately for Purdue, they kept getting the ball back. They kept moving the chains, but when they got to midfield, they just staggered. And I really think they had to use Devin Maccabee a lot more. I think he's proven over the last few years he's a very effective running back, and they didn't really lean on that at all. And it was very predictable. You could tell Purdue was going to pass every play, even when they didn't have to, from the 10-minute mark up to their last drive. And then the fourth down, it was pretty clear Giles didn't get it at the end, but at the same time, I'm not going to pretend like it should matter because Purdue had infinite chances to tie the game and frankly probably win the game, to go for two at the end, but it was not to be. Michigan State survives another game. I think if Velling is severely hurt, that could be a big issue going into playing Rutgers, but for now, Spartans' bowl hopes are still alive, Sean.
Yeah, and it was they had to win this, and I guess they did, but especially after a first half like that, really disappointing to have to compete and really to the very end with the Big Ten's worst team. All right, Joe, we'll move to Saturday. Now, a ton of important games here. We'll start with the big one. Indiana goes on the road to Ohio State, and Ohio State proves that they're a much better team. The Buckeyes win 38-15 after an opening touchdown from Indiana. Ohio State took over from there. A couple red zone turnovers kept the Hoosiers in it, but then a couple of special teams mistakes from the Hoosiers let Ohio State pull away. We'll talk about the playoff implications later, but Joe, I think we saw a really good team out there and a good team out there, and the score proved that was the case.
I'm going to disagree a little. I just disagree with the way it was phrased, because I do think ultimately at a base level, you're right. I think it was a prepared team versus an unprepared team, and the team that was unprepared was the team that came off the bye that probably has the coach of the year, which I thought was surprising. I think the immediate things that jump out are Indiana's special teams issue, whether it was not fielding a punt cleanly, not covering a punt that Caleb Downs house. Those are two plays that are 14-point swings right there, Sean. You know, you start off the game so hot, you survive a bullet after they get that, 3rd and 35. They get the first down there, you stuff them at the 4. And from there, Sean, you kind of thought Indiana had all the momentum. But we talked about this. You know, whenever Ohio State does get, whenever they're not hot, which has been at the beginning of games this year, you really need to capitalize. Indiana did that at first, but they didn't stretch a lead enough, and then they started making the fatal mistakes. And one thing that's been common, whether it's been Urban Meyer or Ryan Day, the moment you make the critical mistake, the game gets out of hand. And I think 38-15 doesn't quite illustrate how dominant Ohio State could have been. Will Howard didn't have to do much of anything, to be quite frank. He threw 80% completion yet again. Cardell Tate had a heck of a game. So did Emeka Ibuka. Jeremiah Smith didn't have to do much of anything. And then defensively for Ohio State, they just dominated Indiana's offensive line. I thought Curtis Rourke made some bad decisions taking some sacks on third down, but at the same time, if you're sacked 5 times, not all of those are your fault. And completely ineffective in the run game, too. So it was just a perfect recipe on how to get blown out by Ohio State. And frankly, Sean, not to be too harsh to Indiana, if they weren't ranked so high, no one would really even blink at this matchup because it's been something we've seen over the years that's been pretty common.
Yeah, I actually thought Indiana had some success rushing the ball, but it turns out that, when you're playing from behind, I guess Ohio State may have been even okay with that. Rourke was just 8 for 18. He was rushed. He made a ton of mistakes. He missed easy throws. You could tell that the moment was probably a little bit too big for him in certainly the biggest game of his career. And then in terms of Ohio State, yeah, they did sort of pull away with mistakes from Indiana that they'll probably not make again. But on the other hand, they also could have been up 28-7 at halftime had they not turned the ball over in the red zone. So I think it's Ohio State's. I don't know if any team goes into their place and beats them, and they were 1 second away from winning on the road at Oregon. And the way Oregon looked, maybe we might see a flip in the number 1, and it's pretty clear at this point, Joe, will be Ohio State, likely in the Big Ten championship game with Oregon, so they get their rematch that they've wanted. And with what's happened elsewhere, it's one of those teams will be the 1 seed, and the other one will be the 5 seed, most likely. In terms of Indiana, their playoff hopes are probably better than they were at the beginning of the day yesterday, due to all the losses of the 3-loss SEC teams. Ole Miss took a loss. Alabama took a loss. Indiana, as long as they take care of Purdue, Joe, they are sitting with a pretty good chance of being in the college football playoff.
I think they're in. I think Cignetti's post-game presser before all the madness with Alabama and the Ole Miss thing had gone down, but even before the Alabama loss, I thought they were fine, and I think Cignetti indicated that. Now, if you did it based on the performance alone, of course not. I think even Hoosier fans would admit it would not have helped their case, but with everything else, it's almost impossible to say that they're going to be out of the playoff. Now, whether they host or not is a completely different debate that I don't think we should get into right now because a lot more games have to be played over the next 2 weeks. But as of now, Hoosiers should be in, and barring a disastrous loss to Purdue, I don't think people could pose much of an argument to that.
All right, Joe, one of the other early games of the day that included a ridiculous finish that I was watching in the line of Yankee Stadium for the Notre Dame Army game. This was Illinois going on the road to Rutgers in New Jersey, and the Illini probably with the most stunning win of the day, and that's pretty surprising considering all these other ones. They have a chance late, Illinois, to kick a game-winning field goal. Rutgers ices the kicker. He misses, and instead of trying to let that kid kick it again, they try and throw it into the middle of the field, and Luke Altmaier finds Pat Bryant, and he goes all the way to the end zone for a touchdown. So Rutgers snatch defeat out of the jaws of victory here, and Illinois pull off an improbable victory.
I thought the most surprising part of this game wasn't even the ending, believe it or not. I thought it was the fact that both teams scored in the 30s and that it was more of a shootout than I thought. Going in, I think we both predicted low 20s to high teens or just mid-20s at most. I think that's what most of the experts and most of the Big Ten pundits have predicted, but not the case at all. I do not think Rutgers' offense played poorly at all. I thought Athens Kalkmanis ran the ball well. Throwing-wise, it kind of is what it is at this stage. The Greek Freak is not getting any more freaky. Outside of that, Kyle Manungai, another perfect performance. I thought Ian Strong had a pretty great game too. In Illinois, their offense has come on, man. Ever since the Oregon debacle, even a little in the Minnesota game, they've been a lot better. They've been a lot more consistent. And Luke Altmaier's thrown the ball a lot better over the years. Over the course of the year, and whether it was the Michigan State game last week, albeit against the injured secondary. I think this week solidified how much better he's gotten. So really good on Illinois. I think just listening to Rutgers post game, I don't think this necessarily was as crushing as it would have been had they been 5-5 entering this game. I think the fact you're 6-4 losing like that, I think even Kyle Minogue said it was really good football, and unfortunately they just made one more play, as Greg Schiano said, and I can't really disagree with that assessment. I think two teams that if they played 10 times, they might split 5-5.
Yeah, from the little parts of I saw of it, it seemed like two very even teams, and ultimately Illinois had the ball last. All right, up next, Joe, we had the Iowa Hawkeyes go on the road to College Park to play Maryland, and the Hawkeyes took care of business. They took a 16-0 lead early in the third quarter, and they see it out for a 29-13 victory. Impressive from Caleb Johnson and the Hawkeyes.
Yeah, shut up. Sorry, just camera messed up for a sec. But no, yeah. I mean, Caleb Johnson, 35 carries. I believe it's like 136 yards, if I'm not mistaken. Something to that degree. That's what you do when you have a walk-on quarterback in there. You do not let him make any decisions. You just run the ball. And admittedly, I thought Maryland was going to win this game because of the implications of what Iowa's had to deal with offensively over the last 2 weeks. And I thought eventually Iowa's defense would have to give out based on the way they've been uncharacteristically scored on this year. Not saying they're bad. I think they're still one of the better units in the conference. But, I mean, Maryland, it's kind of the same old, same old. When the offense stagnates, you know the defense can't help you out. And when the defense did spot them a few plays in the second half, the hole was already too big. And coming back more than 2 score deficits against Iowa and Phil Parker, it's as common as seeing the Loch Ness Monster. It's just not going to happen.
And especially Billy Edwards did leave the game with an injury. He did not return. So Iowa takes care of business on the road. All right, up next, Joe, we got Penn State going on the road to Minnesota. Again, a lot of fireworks late. The Nittany Lions win 26-25. But let's talk about the end of the game here. Minnesota, with 5:48 left, down 4, decides to take a field goal to make it a 1-point game. Pretty unnecessary, in my opinion. And then they end up just letting Penn State run the entire clock out. So P.J. Fleck, again, under scrutiny for a interesting decision, and Penn State's college football playoff hopes are alive, barely. This one probably would have knocked them out, or at least to the back of the pile, and the Nittany Lions improved to 10-1.
Yeah, Sean, I think the gutsy fake punt on that 4th and 1 at the beginning of the last drive of the game was one of Franklin's most, I'm not even going to say bold, I think that was one of his more brilliant calls. Obviously, how that goes is it's a coin flip. If it goes terribly and Minnesota ends up winning because they score on that with short field position, it's the same old with James Franklin. I mean, you've read Black Shoe Diaries. We've read Blue White Illustrated. I think everyone at this stage of this conference, even if you're a West Coast fan, can kind of understand where that would go. I do want to highlight, I thought, was the bigger play. I thought Max Brosmer played a really good game, but fumbling at midfield when they were going to take the lead back because you couldn't convince me they weren't. I thought that was the story of the game. I thought Minnesota made one too many mistakes, and we were trying to pull an upset against the top 5 team. That's something you absolutely cannot do. I thought Drew Aller and Tyler Warren, I mean, truthfully at this stage, Sean, based on the big game performance, exclude the Ohio State game, but even if you want to include it, that has to be one of the best duos in the conference, if not the country. I think Tyler and Drew really work well off each other. I think they're blankets for each other, quite frankly, and I think Penn State's run game, although solid, I think the story of their offense this year, if you ever ask me 20 years from now, it's going to be Tyler Warren and Drew Aller.
Yeah, Aller has really stepped up from last year, I think. Not that he was bad last year, but he's certainly an above-average quarterback in this league, and they get the job done. Joe, it would have been interesting to see where they would have fallen to had they lost this game, because I think we certainly give Minnesota a lot of respect. They're definitely in the top half in this conference, but I guess we'll never know. As a certain artist says, Penn State gets the job done 26-25. All right, up next, Joe, we've got your Michigan Wolverines, and if you watched them all year and you saw 50 next to their name and you're surprised, well, there's a reason why. Michigan improves to 6-5 with a 50-6 win over Northwestern. Kalel Mullings with 3 TDs, Donovan Edwards as one. And Davis Warren throws the ball 35 times for 195, a touchdown and an interception. But, Joe, Michigan's offense finally bursts out in a big way, and this was a huge victory for Michigan to clinch bowl eligibility.
I want to say two things. One, I don't think the narrative that the Bryce Underwood commitment necessarily put pressure on the team. I think that's pretty far-fetched. I think that's the definition of journalistic reaching, to be quite honest. What I do think could be the case is his commitment and what's going to be a lot of 5-star and high 4-star flips is telling Kirk Campbell, you have 2 games to audition for these guys before we push you out the door, so you better make it good. He's making it good so far. 1 of 2 down, albeit the second one is going to be Northwestern's a level 2. Ohio State's a final boss level. So completely different story. I don't want to talk about next week's game too much because I do want to highlight a few things. Michigan's O-line's come a long way. I think the real shame of it is I think with better play calling and better passing, whether it's been quarterbacks, wide receivers, tight ends, whoever, I think they would be accredited a lot more. And with a pretty hard schedule this year, had they opened with, this is not making an excuse by any means, they probably would have matured a lot faster, more so than being thrown into the flames against Texas, being exposed to a certain extent by Washington, having to reshuffle through the month of October, especially with the injuries. And the same could be said with Michigan's secondary. They were obviously helped a lot with an elite defensive line, but on the defensive line front, you could say it's vice versa. With a better secondary, they probably get home even more. And Michigan's probably not staring at 6-5, having to beat Northwestern to get to bowl eligible. So, we will talk about the Bryce commitment probably on a future episode. Maybe we'll save that more for 2 weeks around National Signing Day because I think it's been covered by local media and national media a whole lot that I don't want to waste our viewers' time here. But nonetheless, bowl eligible in their worst season since in their worst bowl season since the dark ages of Rich Rod and Brady Hoke. It is good to see them get to a bowl game, though.
Yeah, in all seriousness, Joe, Michigan probably did need to win this game to go to a bowl eligible or to become bowl eligible, and now you're going into Ohio State next week with really nothing to lose. I mean, you are supposed to be swept aside and crushed, and if you lose 50-7, you're still going bowling, and it's a really good chance for Michigan to do something special, and this season would be looked at a whole lot differently if you're 7-5 with that win. But we'll talk about that later in the week on our preview episode. But it seems like this Michigan team is improving over the course of the year, and obviously hindsight is 20/20. But had the AD and Sharon Moore gone back, that Texas game probably would have been a couple weeks later. And maybe things would be different.
Or not scheduled.
Or not at all. Yeah, that could have been the case too. But, yeah, you've really got 3 of the top 5 teams in the country on your schedule, and then you lose a couple other games you probably shouldn't have, and, that's how you end up at 6-6. Wisconsin goes on the road to Nebraska. Seemed like 2 teams sort of going in different directions. And, Joe, the Cornhuskers get to bowl eligibility with a 44-25 win. Dylan Raiola plays extremely well, 293 yards passing and a touchdown. The offense was clicking early and often, a 2-score lead at halftime. They never looked back from there. Impressive victory from the Cornhuskers here to sweep aside what was a trending up Wisconsin team.
I think the addition of Dana Holgerson's going to be one of the more underrated decisions a coach made mid-season especially. I think it was really gutsy to take a guy, albeit a guy who's been in college football, whether it was Houston, West Virginia, to bring him in November to completely change play calling and to have a new general, for lack of a better term, and to have it pay off in this way. 44 points. Nebraska didn't turn it over. I mean, they had the turnover on downs at the end. I'm not counting that.
It doesn't count as a turnover anymore. I learned that yesterday.
Yeah. Most drives ended in a kick, whether it was a punt, but a lot more ended in field goals or touchdowns, and that's why it was 44, Sean. And that's not a number we've seen Nebraska put up a whole lot, whether it was the Frost era or the Rule era. Certainly not the Rule era. It's been defined more by defensive greatness. I think Wisconsin's captain said it best. This one's on the defense, Sean. I thought the offense did their job. Scoring 25 points on Nebraska for most teams has been good enough over the last 2 years. But this is the first time Dylan Raiola's really shown real flashes of what he could do against a really good against a really solid team, I'd say. And I think that's got to be really exciting for Nebraska fans. You saw it's kind of an exorcism of sorts. They rushed the field. Now, I don't think Nebraska's going to be rushing the field after they get to 6 wins a whole lot more in the future. I think this is kind of the first step they have to take into rebuilding because it's been a miserable 15 years. There's no other way to say it, Sean, and really a miserable decade since the post firing of Bo Pelini. So, really happy for the Cornhuskers, and to everyone who makes fun of the Bulls and getting the 6 wins. To certain blue blood programs, it does mean a lot, and you can take that any way you want it to. But good for that fan base because they have not had anything to cheer about of late in football. So, good for them.
And for Wisconsin, Joe, their game next week, bowl eligibility will be on the line. That's at noon on Friday against Minnesota. All right, Joe, the last game of the weekend, the L.A. Derby. USC goes on the road to the Rose Bowl to play UCLA. And what was a really ugly field goal contest early on turned into a 19-13 USC victory. 3 chip shot field goals had the Trojans up 9-3 at halftime. A touchdown and a field goal from USC had the Bruins up 13-9 after the third quarter. And then a touchdown and another field goal gave USC their 6-point victory. So, Joe, a ugly one at best, but USC again getting to that 6-win threshold, and with considering who they have next week, again, very important for them. So, Joe, again, an ugly one for USC, but they got the job done.
Yeah, Sean, and this is not something they would do even 3 weeks ago. I mean, we know the story of USC this year. It was loss after loss after loss in one-possession games. And the only team that did it better than them in terms of losing games like this was Nebraska. So kudos to both those teams overall. I think Jada Maiava in this game, I thought he made some poor decisions, but it wasn't any costly decisions. And ultimately, I thought Lincoln Riley did a really good job in this game. I think he wasn't overly aggressive. I think he trusted his defense a lot and maybe trusted more so that UCLA's offense wasn't capable to make the big play, which he was correct about. And, the game control at the end, kicking the field goal, trusting the D, that's not something I would have said about USC over a month ago. So I do think this team's progressed a lot now. If you want to factor like Michigan or like even a Nebraska to an extent, if you want to factor preseason expectations into it, well, of course it's going to be a disappointing year. But I do think if you look at it in the totality of where they've been from October or really September 21st to today, I do think Lincoln Riley's done a really good job coaching. And, like I said, next week, kind of similar to Michigan, if they do beat Notre Dame, I don't think it's going to have the same weight as if a Michigan beat at Ohio State. But I do think you might be able to put a B- level grade on this season more so than the C or D that I'm fully expecting most national analysts to give them should they lose that game.
And, Joe, we're going to hope to do an episode on each of the teams in the conference in the offseason. Probably, after we'll probably start some of the teams that are eliminated early, before Christmas, and then as the seasons end, we'll go from there. But, we talked about it in the beginning of the season, how they need to sort of fine-tune their style to more of the Big Ten, bigger players, smash mouth football, rather than sort of the defense is optional Pac-12 style. And I think they're starting to do that just a little bit, and this one proves that. And 7-5 with a victory against Notre Dame sounds a lot better than 6-6. So a number of teams around the Big Ten, Joe, in bowl eligibility. We've got Wisconsin with 5 wins and Michigan State with 5 wins. They'll go into next week needing to win. And then Rutgers, Nebraska, USC, Minnesota, Michigan, Washington, Iowa, Illinois, Penn State, Indiana, Ohio State, and Oregon are all going bowling. The college football playoff re-rack has not happened yet, so we'll be sure to send a post out when that happens, and be sure to look out where the Big Ten teams lie there. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this Week 13 recap episode. Be sure to check out our other videos on the channel if you haven't done so already. We got some MT previews, some recaps for what's a pretty packed feast week here. And then, Joe, we've got rivalry weekend next weekend, then conference championship weekend after that. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.